an honor to be with you, and I am always elated to talk about politics, and I think that's why we have a big crowd here today. And for whatever reason, we get juiced up about national politics in Louisiana and across the nation much more than we do local, and we'll talk a bit about both of them. So I'll try to cover as much ground. And Susan's birthday, by the way, is January 8th, which she shares with Elvis Presley. And we're both Capricorns, and George Bell, who was here earlier, he's January 15th too. So George and I wish each other a happy birthday once a year, and we're glad to have it once a year. But Jesus was a Capricorn, as was Muhammad Ali, who was my all-time hero. And in the old days, you used to find out a lot about somebody by just asking them their opinion of Muhammad Ali, and I think today you can find out about the same degree of information about somebody when you ask them their opinion of Donald Trump. And we'll be talking a bit about the man from Gotham City, but I do find it a bit curious that Kamala Harris got 38% of the votes in Louisiana, and she got almost 800,000 votes, which is well over 200,000 more than Jeff Landry received in winning last year without a runoff for governor. So we're not as active in voting for important elections, and we do have a runoff for mayor on December 7th, and briefly, it's, of course, the two-term incumbent, Sharon Weston Broome, a Democrat against the Republican Sid Edwards, and I've got to get Woody Jenkins credit, also a Capricorn, by the way. He'll be 78 on January 3rd, and I'm sure he's thinking he's going to get a Republican-elected mayor for the first time in 24 years in Baton Rouge. It'll be a hard lift with Sid Edwards. This is a parish that is veered wildly blue in the midst of a Red Sea, and it used to be the other way around. And now we have definitely a case in which it's very difficult for a Republican in a competitive race to win in East Baton Rouge Parish. Kamala Harris received 54% of the votes here and only got 38% statewide. But it'll be a race, and Sharon Weston Broome is a bit of a wounded warrior, but she's never lost a race in 36 years, so I think she will be the favorite. But I do encourage everybody to vote no matter who you're for, who you're against, or even if you're indifferent. It's important because this is a great group of people. I call our audience at WRKF the most enlightened audience in the world, and this is the most enlightened staff in the world right here. And I think this group is symbolic of the great things about Baton Rouge. Greg told me we're still the 6th largest Rotary Club in the world, the 4th largest in the United States. Yesterday I had Mary Stein from the library on, and she noted that we have almost 250,000 people in East Baton Rouge Parish with library cards. So on a percentage basis, we are, I guess on the record, one of the most literate, not illiterate, but literate populations in the United States. And there are a lot of great things happening in our community that we don't focus upon, which we should. But we are divided as a country, and I'm sure in this community to some degree, about what's happening on the national level. And some people are really happy about Donald Trump returning to the White House, and others are really unhappy. And in Louisiana, the fact is, when we look at Trump getting 60% of the votes, first candidate for president to get over 60% in Louisiana since Ronald Reagan in 1984, if we do the math, it's apparent that he got about 85% of the white vote, and Kamala Harris got about well over 90% of the black vote. So we're voting largely along racial lines, and that's something I wanted to focus upon because the South, to a large degree, is doing that. Kamala Harris received 41% of the votes nationwide from white citizens, but in the South, not so much. And the SEC, with its 12 states, 16 schools, 12 states, has collectively 160 electoral votes. And she received 0, and Donald Trump received 160. And he won in the Electoral College 312 to 226. So if we do addition and subtraction, that means she got 226 in the other 38 states in the District of Columbia, and he got 152. And Donald Trump received 60% of the votes in the 12 states of the Southeastern Conference. Kamala Harris got 40, and in the rest of the country, she won 53-47. But that's not how we choose presidents, and thank goodness it isn't. But I do think we have some real issues with the Electoral College, because 7 states got all the attention. Louisiana got virtually no attention, and neither did New York, neither did California, neither did Illinois. Texas didn't get much. Florida didn't get much, because we know pretty much going in whether a Republican or a Democrat will win those states, and all the electoral votes go to the winner, except for 2 states that do it by congressional district, Nebraska and Maine. And it's not a good way to choose the president, because we do it with, Louisiana has 8 electoral votes, because we have 2 members of the United States Senate plus 6 members of Congress. So you put the 2 together, it's 8. So that means our votes count more than people in California and count less than people in Wyoming or North Dakota or some smaller state than we are. And we're an average state. We're 25th in America. And there are some things happening that perhaps for those of us, and I've been one of those who've said we're probably in a trend that's going to continue for a while. Donald Trump, for example, this wasn't just a one deal for him. He's 35-1 in the Southeastern Conference. But I went back to 1976 when Jimmy Carter won. And as a son of the South and a Democrat, he carried every state in the SEC except for Oklahoma, which is the newest member, and he almost won there. So it was 11-1 for Carter. And in that 76 election, 28 of the states have flipped from Democrat to Republican and back and forth. So 28 states from 1976 voted differently last week than they did 48 years ago. And it's a case in which we change over time. And the issues are much different now. Donald Trump's in favor of tariffs. That used to be something some Democrats were in favor of. In fact, when Bill Clinton passed or signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, he did so largely with Republican support, not Democratic support. But now the Republicans are evolving into the party of labor. Ronald Reagan, of course, was a big hawk and was against Russia, and now we have a Republican Party that to some degree is negotiating with a guy who I think all of us would agree is a really bad guy in Vladimir Putin. But some people believe this is a way to resolve the terrible war we're having in Ukraine. So I was looking at income, and this is one that just blew me away. Donald Trump got a majority of votes for those earning under $30,000 a year. And Kamala Harris got a majority of votes for those earning over $100,000 a year. So the Democrats can no longer say the Republican Party is a party of rich people and fat cats, because now it's evolving in which we may go completely the other way when it comes to that. And I think part of that is related to the Citizens United decision in 2010. It was thought that that might kill the Democratic Party. And in response, the party started courting big tech, higher educated voters, higher income voters, and now it was slight, but it was over 50%. Democrats had more people voting for them in this last election earning over $100,000 than Republicans did in the biggest election of all, the presidency of the United States of America. So who knows where it's going, but it's going to be a fascinating ride. And Donald Trump has lived rent-free in the American mind now for 9 years. I don't think there's any doubt he's the most well-known person in the history of the world. There are 8 billion people on the earth, and most of them know who Donald Trump is. And he's going to be around for at least another 4 years. And Franklin Roosevelt won 4 national elections, but he was dead within 100 days of his 4th term. So he was around for about 13 years when we had a much smaller country. And Trump's going to be around for at least 13 years, and then we'll see. But I have a feeling whoever gets the reins of the Republican Party, whether it's J.D. Vance or somebody else after him, they'll be a lot like Donald Trump. He is the Republican Party. He has basically captured that party in his own image. And the Democrats are still determining who they are and what they are. And it didn't work. But these things go in cycles. And I said to people who were for Trump or for Harris that be careful, because if Harris wins, quite likely the Republicans will win the midterms, and then they'll win the presidency in 2028. where if Trump wins, quite likely the Democrats will win the midterms and the presidency in 2028. I'm 66 years old, and my first election was 1960 when I was 2. I don't remember much about that, but I do remember John Kennedy on January 20th, 1961, when I was 3 years and 5 days old, taking the oath of office. I do remember that. I remember watching on the black and white television at 1954 Fillmore in New Orleans, Gentilly, over and over and over, and I thought, gee, this is a big deal, and it was. But in those elections, 17 of them, there have been 9 victories by Republicans and 8 by Democrats. And so we do tend to go in cycles, and we do tend to often vote for divided leadership. And the fascinating aspect of what's coming with Donald Trump is he not only has the presidency, but he's got the Senate, the House, and the courts are largely ruled. The Supreme Court, the highest court, certainly is by conservative people. 6 of the 9 members were appointed by Republican presidents. People may forget, but I'm old enough to remember that when Roe v. Wade became the law of the land in 1973, it was a 7-2 vote, and 7 of the justices had been nominated by Republican presidents. So Republicans have kind of, through the luck of the draw, gotten a lot more Supreme Court justices through history than Democrats have. And I would suspect that Alito and Thomas will probably leave the court, and Trump will appoint much younger justices, and the Senate, of course, will back whoever he chooses if they're a reasonable choice. And we have midterms in 2026, and in Louisiana, quite likely, we're going to have closed primaries. That's what Jeff Landry wants. The legislature has approved it, meaning that Bill Cassidy, who is running for re-election, unless something changes, he will have to face a more conservative Republican in the primary, and Cassidy now has to deal with a president that he voted to impeach. So I would think he is in real treacherous territory as far as his re-election quest, and if he is to survive, he's probably going to have to cozy up to Donald Trump, and it'll be curious to see if he'll do that. But even if he survives, the Democrats will have a fresh candidate, and let's just say hypothetically it's John Bel Edwards. I would say that race would be in play, and it could be Edwards or somebody else, but he would be the most likely one. The Democrats don't have a whole lot of depth in Louisiana right now, with Republicans holding every statewide office and the governorship and both U.S. senators. But many of them are former Democrats. Cassidy's a former Democrat, John Kennedy's a former Democrat, and I could name some others. Now, the members of Congress, we do have 2 members of Congress who are Democrats, and one of them is Cleo Fields, and he may be the most fascinating story of all the people who are going to Washington other than Donald Trump, and that he's going there 28 years after he lost his gig because of redistricting, and now they have managed to give him a district that was favorable, and he won without a runoff, and he is back. And he told me that when he was campaigning in Opelousas that a nice gentleman said, I'm going to vote for you. And he says, why? He goes, because your father was a really good congressman. and same guy. Cleo still looks young, but he's around. And he is resilient. He's a lot like Donald Trump. And Jeff Landry, our governor, is people who discount him as a dummy, they do so at their own risk, because so far, now it may not last, but so far what he has done is amazing, because he has neutralized the trial lawyers, which would be the normal adversary to him, and he's neutralized the Black Caucus because he gave another congressional district to 1/3 of the citizens, which was the right thing to do, in a Supreme Court district. And so right now, there is no real strong opposition to him, but he may find out with this tax plan. And Buddy Roemer, who was one of my favorite people when he was elected in 1987 as a Democrat, he did exactly what Landry did. He tried to revamp the tax code, and it went to a vote of the people a little over a year later. He took office in March of '88. This went to the polls in April of '89, and he lost 55 to 45%, and he never recovered from that. So Landry, he takes the risk of losing a lot of capital if this does not play out as he wants it to. And revamping the tax code is really hard, because He wants to cut income taxes, which is a noble idea, but you got to find the money somewhere. That means somebody's going to have their taxes raised or these tax incentives go away, and each one of those has a constituency. So it's a dangerous path that the governor is taking, but he is brave, and we will see where it goes, and if he's successful, I would say he's probably on the road to winning another term in office. He's very close to the president, but he's going to have some a big sell to make this happen. And right now, as we know, things are evolving at the Capitol, and we'll see where it goes. But he's no shrinking violet. He has come, and even though he only had 35.6% of the people show up to vote a year ago, he got a majority of the votes, and I would say he's got a mandate because people make a decision to vote or not to vote, and about 2/3 of the people in our state chose not to vote in that election. But Jeff Landry, he won. And he's a guy who, I remember at this podium in 2015, that's 9 years ago, I picked the governor's race right, and I picked the lieutenant governor's race right, but I said that I thought Buddy Caldwell would beat Jeff Landry, and I was dead wrong about that. And one of the reasons he didn't beat him was because Cleo Fields supported Jeff Landry and put him on ballots, and Landry got a large share of the black vote. And you've got two Republicans who were splitting up the vote on the conservative side. That enabled Jeff Landry to get enough votes to become the Attorney General for 8 years, and then he won the election. And I remember being at a forum with him and before the last governor's election, and he said that Rispone was going to win, and I said, no, Jeff, he's not going to win. But I said, the good news for people who like General Landry is that we're looking at the next governor. And on that one, I have to say, it wasn't a bold prediction, because if Rispone lost, Landry was the heir apparent. He got the nomination of the Republican Party, the endorsement, and there he went. But he's a guy who could be chosen as a cabinet secretary by Donald Trump. I doubt that that's going to happen, but let's say if Trump wants him to be Attorney General, Landry would have a difficult time turning down the president. And John Bel Edwards once told me, I did 93 shows with him, and he told me that if Joe Biden had called him and asked him to be a member of his cabinet, even if he didn't want to do it, he would do it, because he went to West Point, and when your commander-in-chief asks you to do something, you salute the flag and you do it. But if Landry leaves, that means Billy Nungesser's the governor, and there is no special election. He's the governor for the duration of the term. So that would change the inertia of Louisiana politics, and already we have Nungesser making noise, not liking a good portion of the current governor's tax plan. So Louisiana politics is always interesting. I've interviewed 11 governors, and I'd say we get, as I mentioned, we get a lot of grief for what we don't have in Louisiana. But generally, we've elected very smart governors, and the two Edwards, I would put them in the genius category, along with John McKithen and Bobby Jindal. Jindal could go back to Washington, too. He's been working hard. He's made 3 trips to Mar-a-Lago in the last year, and he's the same guy who called Donald Trump a carnival barker and said he's not a Democrat, he's not a Republican, he's Donald Trump. But Bobby Jindal, he's a persuasive fellow, and we'll see if he can get a job in Washington. But he's all dressed up and no place to go. Jindal was elected at 36 years old, so he actually is younger now than Jeff Landry is. Now, I've covered a lot of ground, and I hope I haven't veered off to too many tangents, but it's always a joy to speak with you. This is a great audience, and it makes me proud to be a member of the club and to be a resident of Baton Rouge. And I see these young people, and talk about, they come out, as Trump would say, right out of central casting. Look at them, they got it together. So BRH Interact, thanks for coming today. And if you have any questions, I don't know how much time we have, but let's make 7 minutes. Okay, Ralph?
Jim, with the tax package at the legislature, does all of it go to the people to vote, or is part of it non-constitutional and will become law, and part of it not? Can you?
Well, the way I understand it, it's both, but most of it apparently will go to the voters, and that's very hard for voters really get an idea of what they're voting on if it's 40 pages long, as we saw with the change in the parish government that didn't work. And that's another reason why it becomes a hard sell. The first thing somebody who's against it can say is that it's not even on the ballot is what you're voting for. And the wording needs to be really good to bring some clarity. But yeah, it could be a real mess because people don't want to go in the booth and read a book before they vote. And most people, believe it or not, most people don't really look at the ballot too much before they cast their ballots. Yes?
So I'm interested to know, you mentioned that most Democrats have the higher income level in this past election, or people who voted Democrat. And I saw a graph showing how education levels also affect how you vote. So I was wondering your opinion on how most people who voted Democrat in the past election have higher education rates.
Well, now that's not as wide as it has been portrayed, but yes, most people who are more highly educated have been voting for Democrats for president during the Trump years, and most people without a college degree have been voting for him. And in this country, there are more people without a college degree than there are with. And Susan's out here, but there she is. But I remember she was running a campaign for Rodney Alexander, a very close race with Lee Fletcher. This was 22 years ago, and Fletcher was pounding away that Rodney Alexander didn't have a college degree. And they're running in rural North Louisiana, and I think he won the race for Rodney Alexander. Yes?
Jim, thank you for being here today. I think it's really interesting what's happening, I guess, in the Republican Party with the populism. I mean, you just talking, I mean, Jeff Landry, our governor's like that too, right? Like you said, I mean, he's 100% Trump, but he's also close with and aligned with Cleo Fields, and he's also does a lot of back-end deals with the trial attorneys. So like, it's like a lot, it's similar, he's transcending party lines in many different areas. Does that have any correlation with what's happening in the type of people that are voting? I mean, the largest minority group in the country is shifting, and it was almost split for this election, Trump and Harris, in terms of the Latino population, right? So was it 45, 55 in terms of, which is a huge shift. I mean, 10 years ago, it was almost, the Latino population almost primarily voted Democrat, so that's a huge change. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the parties are evolving, and it's because you fish where the fish are, and they're going where the votes are, where they think they are, and because of that, Trump has made a very good sales pitch to people of color. He's not getting a majority, but he did get over 40% of the Hispanic vote. And if you believe exit polls, he got 23% of the votes from black men, which means almost 1 out of 4 black men in the United States voted for Donald Trump. That didn't happen in Louisiana. But I looked, rural voters voted for him 64 to 34. Urban voters voted for her 59 to 38. And when you look at the Democratic Party, because they lost those 3 key swing states, and by the way, one of the things I was going to mention about the Electoral College is that she lost by about 2 million votes. It's getting closer, 2 to 3, but now it's within 2 points because the votes in California are still coming in. But she lost resoundingly in the popular overall vote as he did to Hillary Clinton. But if 115,000 votes had flipped from him to her in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, she would have been the president. And so they try to center in on groups that they think will help them. And it's a geographical thing too, because if you look at the coast, the West Coast and the East Coast are voting for Democrats. But the South, the Southeastern Conference in particular, and most of the West, Harris only carried 6 states west of the Mississippi. She carried New Mexico, Colorado, Hawaii, California, Oregon, and Washington. And in 1976, when Carter won, Gerald Ford carried California, Oregon, and Washington. So things will evolve, but Trump has amazingly made the Republican Party the party of working people. I would say union members, a lot of them voted for him, and he's also appealed well to veterans. And he, of course, by his own admission, dodged and weaved in Vietnam, as did Joe Biden, by the way. But But he is a guy. He's an attitude. Someone said the other day. He's not just a man. He's an attitude, and it's been people. About 40% of the people have bought into it. And one of the things I think that worked in his favor in elections or won at the margins is that people who voted for him twice are unlikely to vote against him again. And the same thing is true of Sharon Weston Broome. A lot of people have already voted for her twice, so they're likely to vote for her again, which makes her the favorite. But Trump, we'll see. He's 78 years old. He'll be older than Biden when he leaves office if he stays healthy. But little things like, and it wasn't such a little thing, but I'm sure the assassination attempts helped Trump to some extent. And getting Bobby Kennedy, even though he was on ballots in several states, getting him out as a real candidate helped Trump. And when you win by as small a margin as he won in the Electoral College, all those little things sometimes add up to big things. But the Democrats are now shaking their heads because they put all their stock on the choice issue, the reproductive rights issue, and it was a big issue, and 10 states votes for pro-choice initiatives. Eight of the 10 were majority. In Florida, it didn't pass because you needed 60%. So they were on the right side of the country on that issue, but at the expense of a lot of other issues that were not addressed that obviously, I think if Kamala Harris had to do it over, she would. But I'd say in 107 days, she did a pretty good job as a candidate. She had a great debate, she had a good convention, she just didn't win. And when you don't win, you're often considered to be a dummy. And when you do win, even if you win by a few votes, you're a genius. It was what President Kennedy said, that victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. So, two quick ones. Yes?
Burning question everybody wants to know. Can you talk about the Omar the Tiger incident and how that may affect our governor?
Well, it's not playing well. It's not playing well, but he had a good line yesterday. He said he was the only live tiger who showed up Saturday. And, you know, I was there in the 70s, late 70s, and Mike was in a small cage, and they brought him to the games and banged on the cage and got him to growl at the opposition. He lived to be 20 years old. And the players, some of those players I knew who were a little before me, but I got to know, like Tommy Casanova and Warren Capone and now Jerry Stovall, who played defense in particular, they have severe problems with cognition, and it's a result of all those hits they had. So it's okay to worry about the safety of the Tiger, but maybe we should worry about the safety of some of these players too. And LSU's got a freshman lineman who's listed at 334. And if you're 17 and you weigh 334 pounds, I think, you know, I'm not a doctor, but I would say that's probably not a healthy proposition for a long life. So I've suggested what they should do is go back to the Billy Cannon days and have players play both ways, and that way you'd really have in-shape people playing, and you wouldn't have these guys who are morbidly obese, and some of them slim down, but most don't, and it's not healthy for the players either. So if we're going to worry about the Tiger, let's worry about the players too. But Jeff Landry, that one didn't play as well as he hoped, and I doubt that Omar is coming back.
I know we're short on time. I got one more question for you. You mentioned redistricting, and you made the comment that it was the right thing to do. And I'm not asking for clarification on that, but we now have a district in which a Baton Rouge candidate was elected by people in Shreveport, and the other half of Baton Rouge voted for a candidate in Monroe.
Yeah, I don't like the way
Is that appropriate?
No, that's not appropriate. And Baton Rouge has 900,000 people in the metro area. We've got enough for a congressional district without doing all that nonsense. Now, what it may be is that, like in East Baton Rouge Parish right now, I was looking at the numbers the other day, there's still slightly more whites than blacks when you count Hispanics, who mostly identify as whites. And yet we've elected black mayors over and over. Is that you could have two districts in which a black candidate would have a chance winning without them being majority black, and by virtue of trying to do that, you're going to have these weird configurations. And you're right about that. My friend Mike Wolf, a Libertarian Party guy, has made a big case that we're doing it all wrong, and I think we are. But that's what we got, and Cleo Fields, this one, as bad as it is, 28 years ago, it went through every media market. It was a Z, and the only one it missed was New Orleans. He represented almost everybody in the state, it would seem. So, and in Congress, you don't have to live in the district either. At one point, Richard Baker was living in Cleo Fields' district, and he was living in Richard Baker's district, and they both represented Baton Rouge. But I don't like that, and I would hope, but that's being done all over the country, by the way, too. We have gerrymandering both, it depends on which party is in control. They do things to benefit their own party. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.